I think that no matter how good AI gets, like for the most part, it's not going to be able to, in the near term, be able to pick up the phone and call people and do that kind of like the personal stuff of a reporter. Like, are there plans to like try to seed a market and get it to sustainability and then add more reporters? Or how do you think about like adding more kind of like actual human reporters to markets and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the thing, right? Like, let's get to profitability before we start talking about growing beyond our skis. I think that, we definitely think that the audience relationship is what makes an Axios newsletter special, and you can't build a relationship with a bot. It's just like it doesn't happen. So, yeah, more people is better. That's my official AI take. We love people here.
Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and this is The Business of Content, the show about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. Axios Local began as an experiment in translating a national media brand's playbook into the fragmented world of city-level journalism. After acquiring the Charlotte Agenda, Axios used it as a template to launch a network of local newsletters built around a simple idea: hire well-connected reporters, deliver concise, high-signal updates directly to readers' inboxes, and monetize through a mix of local and national advertising. The model leaned heavily on email as a distribution channel and smart brevity as a product philosophy, allowing Axios to build strong brand awareness in early markets while sidestepping many of the traffic and platform challenges that have plagued traditional local news. In a recent interview, executive editor Holly Moore explains how Axios is using AI to shrink newsroom staffing requirements in smaller markets, why the company is experimenting with regional coverage models that stretch a single reporter across multiple geographies, and how its long-term ambition could see it expanded to hundreds of cities. If you want to listen to an audio version of this interview, subscribe to The Business of Content wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, let's jump into the interview. Hey, Holly, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm here to talk to you because you're basically the executive editor of Axios Local, and I'm super excited to hear about what your team has been up to recently, specifically relating to expanding into kind of new, smaller cities and suburbs and how you're leveraging AI. But first, I want to give my audience just a little bit of background on both you and Axios Local. Let's start with you. Like I was looking at your LinkedIn, it looks like you graduated college around the same time as me, around like 2006, 2007, and you went right into journalism. But specifically, whereas I started like as a print newspaper reporter, you went on the website and eventually became like a social media audience, online audience editor type role. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, partially because the print side wouldn't have me. No, actually, I'm a little bit of a nepo baby. My dad worked at the paper, he on the business side of things for a while. And so when I graduated, he was having lunch with the editor, and the editor was like, "Oh, what did she go to school for?" And he said English, which was actually not true. I was a humanities major, which is basically what you do when you don't want a job when you're done. And they were like, "Well, why don't you send her over to apply for this copy editor job?" And I was like, cool, that sounds awesome. I can write. Sounds great. I know grammar. And what I didn't know was AP style, none of it. And I failed that test miserably. So the copy chief was like, I don't know that this is the role for you, but there is this part-time gig over here on the sports desk taking preps calls and doing agate. And so I did that for about 6 months while also teaching English at a high school. And then that was right around the time where people started putting the newspaper on the internet, and they were like, we need a web producer. Who's the youngest person in the room? You, congratulations. You know how to internet. And
And that
so,
was
yeah,
literally like the early 2010s, late 2000s, like how web people and social media people were hired. It was literally just the youngest person in the room.
exactly, exactly. I was like, I don't know what a web producer does. I don't really know anything about it, but my job was literally staying up until they put the print paper to bed, copying and pasting it and putting it on the website into the CMS. And so like you'd wake up and you'd have a print version and a digital version. Um, and then that kind of evolved into a social media situation where they were like, here, young person, tell us how to use Twitter and Facebook. And so I'm actually hilariously still kind of an admin on some of the early Facebook pages that I created. And then that turned into a social media specialist role, and where I ended up like actually working in product for a couple years, writing user stories for the product folks. So like as a user, I would like a tweet button on the website, and then that was kind of like the birth of it all, I guess. It was a very long birth.
And you spent a lot of time working at Gannett. Were you working among its like local newspapers or more on the USA Today side?
Both actually. So I started in local. My first that hey young person job was in Tallahassee at the Tallahassee Democrat, and then the social media specialist was at Gannett Corporate, and so then I moved up to McLean, which is where they were headquartered at the time, and eventually that I ended up in the USA Today newsroom running some trending content teams.
At the national level, or were you
Yeah.
doing like local content and stuff like
Yeah,
that?
so that was national, but part of that job was actually coordinating with the local sites as well. So it was there was like a part of the job that was creating content for USA Today, but there was also a part of the job that was finding content that was local in the local markets and rewriting it for the national audience and putting it on the website. Or and then eventually that turned into, in a great twist of irony, I turned into the planner, which included like planning the print front page by the time I left. So I've done everything, you know. Hey, young person, and then it was like, hey, old person.
When did you get hired to work at Axios?
So I've been at Axios about 3 years and 3 months now. And when I first came, that job was to start a team called the Hub, which was like looking at national data sets that would create content for the local markets. Um, so, all the national data sets, we would like look to see where it had geographically relevant data for the local markets, and then give like a templated piece of content essentially that could be um, turned into inherently local content.
Yeah, so like it would be like a ranking of cities for, most likely to use AI or something like that.
Yeah,
And then
something.
and
Yeah.
then and then if it was the DC local newsletter, you could then repackage that data to
Yeah.
emphasize where DC was in that ranking or
Yeah,
something like that.
exactly. And part of that too was working really closely with the data viz team. And so if it was like data that would have a chart with it, then we would have a batch of charts. So each individual market would have their own chart. And so if you open any of the Axios local newsletters any day, there's usually some sort of graphic in there. So a lot of it was like, I think it's a very smart brevity sort of way of looking at content, as like how do you distill really complex stories into quick visual, uh, uh, you know, quick scannable pieces of content.
Was this data that Axios is collecting, or was it like there's various companies that are
Mhm.
sponsoring polling firms to go collect data on different things, usually sponsored by some tech company or some kind that has some kind of relationship to whatever the data that's collecting. Was this like Axios proprietary data, or was this like a lot of that outside stuff?
So maybe like neither of those really. A lot of publicly available data. So we did a lot of work with like census, and then yeah, also if there was something that was an interesting poll. Our data reporter really does try to avoid the rankings because usually they're based on like flimsy algorithms. But let me tell you, the truth is I kind of love a cheap ranking myself because I do like to compare myself to others. I think that's like an innately human thing, is like, oh, I'm better than Charlotte, or I'm better than Raleigh.
So let's just give a brief history of what Axios Local was. It actually launched several years after Axios launched. So
Yeah.
the original version of Axios is like kind of a national publication, but from the very beginning was kind of niched down into verticals that were very heavily focused on collecting email addresses and coming into the inbox. So it was like a national publication that had a lot of like niche first party data, which I
Mhm.
always thought was really brilliant because it made it perfectly designed for delivering kind of native advertising and something and stuff like that. And then Axios Local was started when Axios acquired the Charlotte Agenda. Is that
Yep,
correct?
that's
Yeah.
exactly
So
right.
so
Mhm.
the Charlotte Agenda was just an independent news organization, and they acquired that, and basically they took its playbook and started copying it across a bunch of different cities. Am I getting this summary correctly?
Yeah, yeah. So Axios national brand is like it focuses on subject matter expertise in, I think they're we're really well known for our politics and our business and our tech coverage. Those are probably the bread and butter. And then local started, so local just turned five. Our first markets turned five. And so that's right around when we acquired Charlotte. And that was started by Ted Williams, and they were doing really smart things. I think they were taking advantage of that. There was like a really particular moment in time where I think Instagram was growing really heavily, and they targeted smart professionals. And I think that was honestly part of the success of that market, was that they had a really strong sense of who they were and who they were going after. And honestly, if you go into Charlotte, the brand awareness for Axios in Charlotte is massive. It's like everybody in Charlotte subscribes to that newsletter. And then, yeah, the idea being, if Charlotte can have this much success, then we can replicate it in markets across the country. I would say that the one thing that we learned is like every market's a little bit different. And so the success that we saw in Charlotte, we were able to replicate from the editorial perspective, but I think, like maybe we missed the moment on growing social and making that the moment at the scale that the Charlotte agenda had. But coming full circle, we're actually about to launch Instagram in all of our markets, so that's exciting.
But for those initial markets, what was the playbook? Like we'll talk about what the playbook is now because I think it's shifting with the AI stuff. But like initially, was how many like reporters were you
Mhm.
hiring in each market, and like what were they doing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so it's probably not coincidental that our earliest markets are also our largest markets editorially. So we have 3 and 4 person teams in some of our original markets. So like Denver has 3 reporters, Chicago has 3 reporters, and the one thing that is consistent across like the original markets and the current markets is we're still very much in the Axios vein of hiring subject matter expertise. So they're like very high quality, well-known reporters in those markets. But one thing that has shifted over time is I think that we're learning that we maybe don't need to go in with the largest number of reporters. And initially, we want to start small and then grow. Um, and as you alluded to earlier, I think the interesting thing that we're doing this year is trying even smaller markets. When you think about a business model, the overhead cost for journalism in general is like headcount is your biggest cost, right? Um, and so when we think about like how do we go into those smaller markets, what does that look like in a way that would be profitable and sustainable? You're going to have fewer reporters, right? So we're thinking about AI as a way to free up some of the bandwidth to take some of those like rote tasks of the production of the newsletter or um,
Yeah, we'll,
like
we'll talk about
yeah,
that in a
okay.
few minutes. I still
Uh,
want to talk about the original version.
sure, sure.
So
Hmm.
it was originally like 3 or 4 reporters in each market, and
Hmm.
like it's not like 6 a.m. City or some of these other ones where it's all pure curation. Like these reporters,
Hmm.
like yeah, some of it was curation, but they were also like picking up the phone and doing like original reporting and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, and we still are. I think that you're going to find in any Axios local newsletter a news roundup, which is like the reporter that is, or the author that's doing the newsletter is identifying stories that are happening in the market that their readers should know. So like that smart friend in your pocket is how we like to describe it. So not just going out and reporting the news, but also curating the interesting news around us. But yes, we are definitely doing original reporting. You're going to find like a good, strong, meaty story in every newsletter. So yeah, some original reporting, some curated news roundups, some graphics and data reporting as well.
How did you divvy up those tasks? Like, was it one reporter owned the newsletter part where they were the curators, or did they have to switch over to where, like, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, somebody had the curation tasks, and then on alternate days, they were able to do their kind of like original reporting and stuff like
Yeah,
that?
I love workflow. Actually, this is one of my favorite topics. It is interesting. It's a little bit different in each market depending on who the people are and like what their strengths are. We really try to lean into what makes people happy. I would say the majority of our markets have found a way to like make one person the person who produces the newsletter on a daily basis, whether it's like maybe they switch days. If it's like a 2 reporter team, maybe one person does it Monday, Wednesday, and then they swap on Fridays, and another does it Tuesday, Thursday to free the other reporter up to go out and do that on boots on the ground reporting. We do have some markets that are one reporter, and obviously they're not able to like divvy it up in that way, but they do work hand in hand with an editor. So our editors are mostly centralized. So like one editor might have three markets. Um, and so they'll spend a little bit more time working with the one reporter cities to take some of that production work off their plates.
So there's a draft that's then turned into some editor who's working in like Arlington who like is editing over several different cities and they're doing like like basic copy editing and stuff like that.
Yeah, so there is a little bit, they're more regional than that. So we don't have editors in Arlington. So we're broken up into several different regions. And so, like, I'm thinking right now about the Mountain and West region because it's our largest geographical region because we have, so a little bit more spread out. And so I'll take Denver as a good example where there's three reporters in Denver. We have one reporter in Boulder, and then we just launched Colorado Springs last week. And one editor is over all of those three markets. And so she's based in Denver and does have a little bit of knowledge, like not a little bit, she has knowledge of the local, how things are a little bit different in each local city because she is out there. We do have some editors that maybe aren't in any of the cities, but we do try to keep them as closely aligned to the region that they're working with as possible.
I know that you're on the editorial side, but like is the sales staff spread out by region or is that more kind of
Yeah,
centralized?
we do have some regional sales as well. We don't have a regional seller in each market. I think that's one of the things that, again, you're right, I'm on the editorial side, so this is not where I am the most comfortable or sophisticated talking about it, but I do think that we do have some sellers in local markets, but we're not in all of them.
And like obviously so there's the local layer and then there's the national niche newsletters and stuff like that, so
Mhm.
theoretically a sponsor that wants to reach like tech workers who live in Denver could like
Mm.
you could check both of those lists of who signed up for the tech newsletter and who's locally in Denver and maybe like target like at that level or something like that's kind of
Yeah.
the thesis behind what you're doing in terms of first
Yeah.
party data and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. And yes, if any tech companies out there want to reach people in Denver, boy, do I have a deal for you. Um, we actually do have like a national sales side and a local sales side, and so we do have a seller in Denver actually. But yes, if any of the national buyers want to buy in Denver, we make that happen. So like the way that the revenue is split, it's it's like half and half right now, roughly.
What's the bread and butter of the coverage for an Axios local? Like, what are the kind of main beats?
So again, that also depends on the people that are in that market. We do try to lean into the subject matter expertise. We hire reporters that are really well versed and well sourced and trusted in those markets going in. And then lean into the coverage areas where they might have the best sourcing. So I would say from a zoom out perspective, when you're getting an Axios local newsletter, what you are getting is high quality reporting told to you by someone who lives there and is helping you kind of guide you through your day and live your best life. And so you're gonna have some of that stuff that is like, um, what is the weather today? Where might the traffic incidents be? In DC, obviously, we're talking a lot about the storm that's here today. You're going to get that no matter who your reporter is. However, if you have a reporter who's like really strong on the development beat, they might be looking and talking to local developers or talking to the city council who are like signing off on making things happen. If you have a reporter who's really good at food coverage, like maybe they've been covering the James Beard for years and years and years, they probably are going to be able to talk to you like through the lens of a chef or like talking about the business of how business is open.
Is there any user generated content component to the local newsletters, like an events board or a jobs board or anything like that?
So in terms of like events board and jobs board, we do have something like that in Charlotte. It is like, you can submit things through like advertising. We have kind of turned away from that in the other markets just because we didn't think it was a big money maker. We do a lot of our reporters do a lot of curating in terms of like events that are fun to go to. We do have an additional weekender send in 5 of our markets that goes out to um, yeah, it talks about like what's happening this weekend and it is curated by the reporter. And I will say It is a time suck. Like finding all the events, going to all of the different calendars, checking all the Facebook events, like that does take a lot of time, and I that is absolutely one of the first places I'm looking to for AI to help us.
Yeah. What about like crowdsourcing? Like, you live in kind of the DC area. I don't know how
Mhm.
familiar you are with Popville, Prince of Petworth, but he just does like an incredible job of like training his audience to send him news tips so
Yeah.
that anytime there's a road closure, a new business opening, some kind of random thing that people are seeing on the street, like they automatically take a photo and they either email to him or they will CC him in a tweet or something like that. Are there processes in place to try to crowdsource information from local audiences?
Yeah, so anytime you respond to one of our newsletters, it goes directly to the reporters. We don't say, hey, we want 5 tips from our audience this week. However, we do have a really strong relationship with our audience, and they do send us tips all the time, and we do get them and we respond to them. We also do a lot of like engagement work as well. So I think one of the benefits to local, one of the like most important things is building up a relationship, because we've all seen the numbers, like trust in media is kind of it's eroding, right? And so I think that you have opportunity in local to really build that relationship between the audience and the reporter. And so we do a lot of like, um, I was at this place this weekend. Here's a picture of it. Were you there? Let me know. Or, we have a couple that do a franchise feature in their newsletters that like they take a stuffy, like a stuffed animal, and like take pictures of it in different places in the city and say, hey, where can you tell me where this is in the city? We'll do it's March Madness season. We often will do brackets around things that are hyper local. So not necessarily basketball, although I think usually Raleigh does a basketball one. Um, but like, best pizza in Chicago, or we love a bracket, and we love to get readers to vote and send us all of their ideas and information. We love the readers.
You do have like some kind of paid membership component, but it seems to be completely
It is.
voluntary. Like there's
Mhm.
not much like stuff behind a paywall or anything like that.
It is all free. And yeah, we do have a membership program, and we're putting a little bit more effort into it this year. That's one of like our strategic initiatives. But people, like, honestly, they volunteer. They want to help journalism in their market. They have basically all they get at this point is their name, their birthday in the newsletter, and sometimes we'll send them some swag, and sometimes we'll have member events. But I would say it's a pretty low lift, and pretty high engagement. It's definitely not nothing in terms of the revenue it brings in.
Yeah, I always wonder about like like obviously if you're a locally owned outlet, you can sometimes, have success with memberships, or if you're a nonprofit memberships, I'm always like, how successful is it when a for-profit national company that's owned by a huge conglomerate like Communications,
Yeah.
like how good is it at really kind of guilting people into just voluntarily giving it money without, putting something behind a paywall? Like I know Vox.com at various times has had some kind of like membership program about like supporting journalism and stuff like that. I'm guessing it's like a very small component of the business.
It is small, but it's getting bigger. I will say, like, Colorado Springs, which launched last week, already has multiple members, and they were throwing money at us after they've read 3 newsletters. So I think a lot. It does. I see where you're going with it, like a centrally owned for-profit newsroom. I understand why that would be the case, but the truth is these reporters are actually super well trusted in their markets. They live there. They see these people in the grocery stores. They respond to their emails. I have one reporter in Des Moines, Lynn, who wrote about she like did a plant swap with some of her audience. It's like they're much part of the fabric. And so even though the company itself is national, the reporters themselves and the newsletters are local, and people feel like very connected. I think the intros and the outros really do a lot for that. So it also feels like a throwaway item, but the really quick and outro is like, this Holly is going skiing this weekend. And like that really, I think, helps people feel like they can trust each other and like that they are more connected. And so I do think that that is what is driving that.
Yeah, so what you're specifically referencing is like at the end of every newsletter, you just have like a one line thing for each reporter just talking about what's going on in their
Hmm.
personal lives or something like that.
Yep, exactly. I that is exactly right. Our marketing team too has done surveys with our members to see like what they're into and why they would be join the membership. And honestly, like it's not the perks. It's not it really is because it makes them feel good in their philanthropic hearts. Like they want to support growing local on the ground. And same.
So you started on the data team, but now you were the executive editor. When did you make that transition?
I've been in this role about not quite 2.5 years. So I was in the hub role for about a year and then took on this part of it.
So what does your day to day look like?
Oh goodness. Well, I'm on podcasts all the time. No, I'm just kidding. Um, so I join news meetings. I talk to our direct reports. We have a new GM in seat who is, we've been talking every day, just making sure that all of the business lines are aligned. We are currently talking a lot about AI. So having, conversations and doing testing, around like what are the things that we can push on. We let's see. I have a weekly meeting with my team. Like all of local joins at least once a week so that we can, it's, mostly a remote newsroom. So I think it's really important to have an anchor point. And, just making sure that we're doing the best work we can.
And like, so are you pushing down like new operational strategies, like in terms of how the cover things or new features within the newsletters, or what are kind of some of the things that you're kind of controlling on a month to month basis?
So this is what's really super interesting about Axios Local, I think, is that we really do allow our local experts to have editorial control of their newsletter. So I'm very rarely saying like, this is a story we need to go after. You guys need to make calls here. If there is a major story that's hitting multiple markets, I do say like, are we having conversations about this? Do we know what's going on over there? But for the most part, the editorial sensibility of the newsletter is on the teams themselves. So they're very entrepreneurial and are able to pull that together themselves. My role is more focused on, yeah, the strategic operations of it. So just thinking through like, um, are we optimizing the workflow as much as possible? Are we, I know I've said AI a lot, and I know you said we're going to wait to talk about it, but like to me, that there's no bigger topic because it is right now. I think we're going through one of the most transformational moments in the news business, and so I spend a lot of time making sure that we're continuously talking about AI and feeling comfortable with AI. I think last year was the year that I thought my number one priority was to make sure that we feel comfortable using it. And this year is the year that I want to see us actually implement some of the things. So just making sure that the room feels ready for the transitional moment that we're in.
One of the criticisms for years against like places like Axios and 6 a.m. City and CityCast was like, sure, this works great in large cities, but those aren't really news deserts. Like they had their local newspapers are much smaller than they were before, but they're not news deserts. Like, does this really scale outside of cities into the suburbs and more kind of rural areas? And there wasn't really a good answer for that for years. Now we're starting to see some of these companies start to push into those local areas. I had one of the co-founders of 6 a.m. City on like a few months ago, and they've gone like radically, like they have entire news, like hundreds of newsletters that are almost 100% AI run. There's not that much of a human editorial layer at all. It seems like Axios has been a little bit more cautious in how it's doing its expansion, so it's leveraging AI, but it's still there's still like human reporters in each of those markets. So tell me about that. I know there was some kind of official partnership with OpenAI. So tell me about, like, we just spent a lot of time talking about the Axios Local Phase 1 with the 3 and 4 reporters. So talk me through this introduction of AI and how it's helping you scale into smaller markets.
Yeah, so I think exactly what you said. What is the business model in these smaller places? There's, some places are news deserts just because there's not tons of people, and therefore there isn't tons of like, uh, uh, not a lot of organizations there to deliver the news. Some of these places are news deserts because there's just not a business model for it. There's tons of people around. And I will say that one of the examples is we went into Huntsville, Alabama last year very intentionally. It's not, well, it depends on how you define news desert. I know there's several definitions out there. It doesn't really have a daily newspaper product that is supporting it. And so, like, we're going to call it news impoverished area. And so we went into it very intentionally with one reporter to say, like, hey, is there a path for us here? We know that there's a population, it's the fastest growing city in Alabama. We know that there's a lot of interesting news happen. Like right after we went in, like a couple months later, Space Force was announced that they're moving. And so they've got a lot going on in that market, and there's definitely a need for the news. Um, it was also one of our first two one reporter markets. So is it possible for one reporter to do a city in that way? Um, it's a lot to ask of one person, to be honest. And I think he's doing a fine job, Derek, down in Huntsville. And the reaction from the audience has been great. They're so happy we're there. They definitely feel like they're being served. And I'm pretty sure that if we put 10 more reporters down there, they would not run out of things to cover. So uh, we are very intentionally trying to go into places that are smaller to see what we are capable of. Our partnership with OpenAI, they don't have any editorial control, and there's really no requirement that we use their technology as part of it. They just wanted to support launches, and there's definitely some simpatico there because we want to go into more places, and they want to support the information ecosystem, and so that's really how much the OpenAI partnership has impacted us. So we had several launches, I think 5 last year, maybe it was 4. And then we're going into 9 more geographies this year, but we are also making some really intentional choices to trying to push on the model a little bit more to see if we can go into even smaller places than Huntsville and Boulder, and like, for example, trying to take advantage of like our regional approach. So I talked about Denver a little bit earlier, where we have 3 reporters in Denver proper, then we have 1 in Boulder. We just launched 1 reporter in Colorado Springs. We're actually hiring, or have already hired, he'll start at the end of the month, 1 reporter that will do a 2-day-a-week newsletter in Douglas County, and then a 2-day-a-week newsletter in Arapahoe County. So all of our other newsletters are 5 days a week. So this is an intentional shift to see if we can spread 1 reporter across 2 geographies with a little bit of a different newsletter cadence, and see if and it's not a small area. The Denver suburbs are, I mean, between the 2 counties, you're looking at like nearly 1 million people population. Um, so, and they have the other markets nearby if something goes awry. For example, last year in Boulder, our reporter took his very first vacation. Good job, reporter. And then there was like a terror attack, and so one of our reporters from Denver was able to go up to Boulder and report without Mitchell coming back in town. And so we do think that there is something to the regional approach as well, both from the editorial side, but also from the business side. So are there sales opportunities where you can package the entire region together and to take it to market that way? So that also takes advantage of having like 1 person in Denver on the sales team as well.
So the OpenAI partnership, it's not like it's building any tools or giving you some kind of special access to its data. It's just kind of sponsoring your
Yeah.
expansion into new markets.
Yeah, well, yes, and we have enterprise access to ChatGPT, so all of our reporters are in there using it daily, and we have credits to use as part of the deal as well. So, like, we are using the technology on the product side.
Yeah, but it's not like a specialized product that built for you. It's just the enterprise version of a OpenAI.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's like obviously a couple different ways you can use AI in journalism. You could do it on the news gathering side. You could do it on the CMS production editing side, and then obviously you also alluded to the advertising side. In what ways are reporters leveraging it on the news gathering side?
So, we're so all of those things that you just said, yes, we're trying them all. So we have built a couple tools that we're trying. So we have a Slack integration that is scraping like Google News to pull up some of the local stories. So when I say that we're curating the news roundups, that we're not putting directly from the tool into the newsletter, but it does get a head start to the reporters to say like, oh, these are the 10 stories that it's going to suggest to us. So we might pick a couple of them and say like, oh, it did not pull that other article that I definitely want to make sure that I'm emphasizing today. So the news roundups is one. We're going to continue to iterate on that because I think where we are going to get the biggest lift on the editorial side specifically is in any of the curation stuff. So like we're curating news link roundups, we're curating lists of events. Um, those are things that it doesn't necessarily take the best reporter in a city to do. And so like, can I take some of that work off of their plate by having the robots do that work for me?
It's like an AI agent that you've trained specifically to do that task.
Yeah, yeah. And again, we're continuing to iterate on it because like AI is continuing to develop at warp speed as well. So, just when we think we've got something figured out, we're like, oh, we built this tool, it's amazing. Can't wait to share this GPT across the enterprise. And then, they'll roll out a new an update and then it'll be like 5.2 and you're like, wait, it doesn't work exactly the same as I wanted it to last week. So we're doing that. We also have an Axiomizer tool, which is a clever name for our copy editor. So our copy edit team has built this, and so it's building it off of our standards and obviously grammar and our sensitive style guide as well. And so like at the end of writing, you should run that any of your copy through that before it even gets to an editor. And so that's hopefully taking some of the workload off of the editors too, who again have multiple markets that they're looking at. Let's see, what else are we doing that's super interesting?
Thing that
Our
I've seen. Oh, sorry.
yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, one thing I've seen some experimentation with, so obviously with the emerging of news deserts, we have fewer reporters who are covering government meetings. But one upside of the COVID shutdown is a lot of these meetings started being broadcast on like Zoom, and so I'm starting to see some experimentation with using like putting a bot into that Zoom call and having it record the Zoom call and create transcripts and then some kind of summary so that reporters who aren't able to attend the meetings are able to get this summary to look for like newsworthy things that happened at like school board meetings, board of supervisors meetings, zoning board meetings, stuff like that. Have you tried any of that stuff?
Yeah, so we did try doing that with Otter a little bit. Honestly, it's a little bit of a weird experience if you're in the meeting to have like Otter has joined the Zoom and you're like, who are you and what are you doing? So, we had to try and set up standards around that, like make sure you reach out and let somebody know that you're going to do that before you do it. But even easier than that, we also have reporters that are taking the video and dropping it into ChatGPT or Claude and getting the transcript of the meeting and then uploading that and saying, can you tell me what is interesting in here? We're also looking at third-party vendors that might be able to curate these sorts of meetings for all of our markets, because I think that's where you're going to run into the efficiencies of scale, right? If you have one reporter that's going to do the transcript and upload it and do the thing, sure, but that still takes a solid half hour, right, to do all that work. And then you multiply that by 35 markets and you got some big math. But if you can find a vendor that's already doing that, they're already pulling it out. Maybe they have some like technology that's going to look at the sentiment analysis of it as well. They can say like, hey, I know you didn't really care about this meeting, but it got real hot at minute 72. And then they can also like pull together agendas so that you know what's going to be on them before you go looking. Like, yes, I think that is super interesting and absolutely something we're looking at.
And then, so how are there any other things I'm missing in terms of what you guys are doing with AI?
Yeah, so I mean, I think those are the things that we're doing like tangibly right now, but there's a lot of stuff that isn't ready to roll out widely that is kind of in progress. We have I just saw that our editorial counsel, our lawyer in house, is building a tool that to do FOIAs. So like writing the FOIAs and sending the requests for you, and then like reading the responses and helping you form a response. Everybody that's FOIA'd knows that that is quite the pain. So that will be very cool. I think a lot of potential there. And the other one that we're playing with that also I think has a lot of potential is those stories that I said, the data stories that are national stories that we drill into the local data. We send out a templated version of that story, and then the reporter does the reworking of the story themselves. Like we're trying to build a tool that will help us localize it automatically. So it won't necessarily be the reporter going to the spreadsheet, inputting their own data. It could be the reporter looking at the final product saying, yep, that seems right to me.
Do you think, like, obviously there's been a lot of news organizations that have ended up with egg on their face with using AI because it seems like they were just letting the AI go rogue and there wasn't an editorial filter. Do you believe that because there's a local news beat reporter there who has to read anything that's coming out, that like that is the kind of filter that can allow you to scale AI in like a more responsible way?
Yes, we're very big on human in the loop. This is like a catchphrase we're saying all over the place. Human in the loop. Make sure, like, don't let anything get out there that hasn't gone through a person to put eyeballs on it. I'm saying that now, March 16th, 2026, but ask me in 2 years. At some point, the robots are going to get so good that I don't necessarily know that. I'm not going to say we're not going to have a human in the loop, but maybe there's things that we're less fearful of because people make mistakes too. So at some point there's like what is the rate of return on it of like, at what point does the robot get so good that you start as a human taking your eye off the ball and like making mistakes that you wouldn't have made the year prior because you're like, it's always getting it right. And then one day it gets it wrong, and that's a problem.
Yeah. Like there are studies with self-driving vehicles that technically a human's supposed to have their hand on the wheel, but the second that the automation starts taking over, then they start easily getting distracted and stuff like that.
I
And
cannot
it's not,
wait. Oh, sorry. I was just saying, I
it's,
cannot wait until I get an autonomous vehicle because I've got kids and they need to get to practice a lot.
yeah. So when you think about Axios phase one as in being before this, expansion with AI versus Axios phase two, in Axios phase one, what would be like the minimum population that you would need? And Axios phase two, what would be the minimum population?
So I will just say, like, Axios phase one, the smallest cities we had were Des Moines, Iowa, and Northwest Arkansas. And I think that those would be the top of the size of like the next phases that we're going to go into. There are a couple large cities that I'm still very interested. Cincinnati's part of our expansion this year. So I'm not saying we're only going into small markets, but I think that that is going to be something that, if you've heard the founders talk lately, the internal joke is that they love to add a zero every time they say the number of cities that Axios Local is going to go into. When I first started, it was like, we're going to get to 100 cities. And honestly, Simon, I think we're going to get to 100 cities sooner rather than later. Then they started saying, like, we're going to get to 1,000 cities. And I did hear at one point they said 10,000. I'm not sure that there are 10,000 cities, but I'm sure if there are, a lot of them are very small. And so like we have to figure out the business model in order to get into that many places.
How many markets are you in now?
We are in 35 as of last week.
And what's the smallest market?
Well, it will be, it might be Boulder, actually. It might be Boulder.
And how big is Boulder population wise, do you think?
Oh, you're asking me like this is like a pop quiz that I was not prepared for.
Sorry, I didn't mean this to be a pop quiz. I'm just trying to I'm trying to understand the scale of this.
Hold on, let me Google that for you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I
you're
didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, you're good. You're good.
I'm just trying to figure out, what the difference is in terms of, phase one versus phase two, and how this is allowing you to scale.
Yeah. So as of early 2025, according to the AI overview here, Boulder is approximately 105,000 to 106,000.
Okay, so yeah, that's a pretty small city.
Yeah.
But are you in a few suburbs as well? Did I read that?
Well, we're going into them. So we're going to launch the Denver suburbs, which are larger, I think, than Boulder. It's a larger geography, though, also. So I don't know.
And could this be expanded internationally, or is this still like a largely domestic thinking?
I think right now we're thinking about it domestically, so United States, but never say never. But we have a lot of 10,000 is a lot of cities to get to first.
Yeah. And is there a plan to like I think that no matter how good AI gets, like for the most part, it's not going to be able to in the near term be able to pick up the phone and call people and do that kind of like the kind of personal stuff of a reporter. Like you gave the example of the one reporter in like Alabama. Is are there plans to like try to seed a market and get it to sustainability and then add more reporters, or how do you think about like adding more kind of like actual human reporters to markets and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the thing, right? Like, let's get to profitability before we start talking about growing beyond our skis. I think that uh, we definitely think that the audience relationship is what makes an Axios newsletter special, and you can't build a relationship with a bot. It's just like it doesn't happen. So yeah, more people is better. That's my official AI take. We love people here.
So when you look ahead like 2 to 3 years from now, what are you hoping to be doing then that you're not doing now?
So I hope that in 2 to 3 years from now, we have a newsletter that is mostly built before the reporter even wakes up in the morning, and that they can go out and do their boots on the ground reporting, meet with the mayor, and come back and drop their words into the product. And when I say newsletter, that is we're newsletter first primarily right now, but I hope also that AI can help us boost other platforms as well. So I think about AI in terms of like reporter assist, production work, and then distribution as well. So I want the reporters to be able to double their ability to meet face to face with people and sources and learn things and get tips and chase them down.
That reminds me that in Ohio, there is an editor, I think of Cleveland.com, who is kind of designing his newsroom so that his reporters are going out, they're conducting interviews, they're gathering source materials and stuff like that,
Mhm.
and then they're uploading it to an AI and having AI write the first draft, and then the editor is responsible for, or the reporter is responsible for then, editing and fact checking and stuff like that. What do you think about that as a
Mm. So yeah, I have mixed feelings about it. I'm not against it from like a philosophical standpoint. I'm against it because I actually think that our at least our reporters are still very good at like putting the words together themselves. I have an internal newsletter that I send to like the local team each week, and last week I spent a good portion of my time trying to build a GPT that would take my weekly meeting transcript and turn it into a story for my newsletter by like uploading things that I had written that I liked to see if it could like build a Hollybot. And I spent more time editing that newsletter than I would have if I had just written it from scratch myself. So, am I against the robots writing after we've done the reporting piece of it? Not wholly, but I don't think they do it better than us yet. Um, I also would say, just in general, for years and years and years, when I've had like interns come to me and ask me what they're looking for in an internship, my one of my first responses is like, I'm looking for someone who's a good reporter. And a lot of times they'll come and be like, I just want to write, and I think this is a great job because I've wanted to be a writer my whole life. And I'm always like, this is not the job for you, if I'm being 100% honest, because best reporters are great reporters. And if you are a good writer, then that is a bonus on top. And so, like, maybe this is a way for the reporters that are really good at reporting and not great at the writing piece of it to like elevate their status.
Yeah, and nobody would say Axios is known for its prose. In fact, that it's kind of the anti-prose company.
Smart brevity is super great for the robots are like really good at it. Like we have, very specific style, and there's rules around it, very intense rules. And I think it helps you get smarter faster, and the audience loves it.
Holly, those are all the questions I had for you. Where can people find you online?
Oh my God. I'm on LinkedIn / Holly Timor, I believe. Or you can, if you really want to email me, you can holly.moore@axios.com.
Awesome. Well, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Simon.